Some First Nations leaders are calling on Ottawa to rein in the separatist rhetoric coming from Alberta.
When treaties were made, they were a sacred covenant between our people and the Crown, and they're not being honored today.
The calls are in response to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's proposal to change the referendum rules and make it easier to vote for secession. Now, yesterday, Premier Smith says she's going to hold a referendum next year with the question of separation included if enough people sign a petition calling for it. For more, we are joined this morning by Anne Sinclair, Professor of Indigenous Studies at the University of Manitoba. Welcome back.
Bonjour. Good morning.
Yesterday afternoon, Premier Smith addressed the referendum question and separatist concerns from First Nations leaders. I want to play for everybody what she had to say.
Therefore, any citizen-initiated referendum question must not violate the constitutional rights of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and must uphold and honor Treaties 6, 7, and 8 should any referendum question ever pass. This is non-negotiable.
What is your reaction to Premier Smith's comments, and how do you see that moving forward?
Well, holding a referendum on Alberta separation would not only be, it would be a removal of the treaties that cover almost the entirety landmass of Alberta. It would also mean that land would revert back to First Nations, and therefore Alberta's in for some negotiation. And it would be a process that would be long because unlike the first 70, 80, 90 years of Confederation, Indigenous peoples have lawyers now, and therefore the treaties would be much more fairer and be much more inclusive of what would be Canadian law or constitutional law, or if Alberta wishes to separate, they'd better start to come up with an idea of how they're going to share the land, or perhaps how they're going to negotiate for the land from First Nations.
Yeah, and a reminder to everybody at home, if they haven't been following the story closely, as you say, most of the province is covered under either Treaty 6, 7, or 8. These are made with the Crown, and these were signed in the early 1800s. So these go back a long way, longer than Alberta's been part of the country. So last week, some First Nations leaders released a statement that read in part, under our treaties, vast areas of Alberta are held in trust by the Crown for the benefit of the Treaty First Nations, not as property of the provincial government. Our treaty territories predate Alberta's entry into Confederation. That happened in 1905. So what is covered under the treaty rights in relation to the land in Alberta?
Well, absolutely everything. The recognition of Indigenous ownership, or what's called title, is way back to the Royal Proclamation of 1763 by King George III. And not going too deep dive into you, I would just say that there's a recognition of Indigenous ownership of the land. Then the Crown goes into agreements called the treaties back in the early days of Confederation. And what that forms is a relationship, an agreement to share territory, not quite in the terms of what First Nations would imagine sharing, but it's certainly an agreement in which to occupy the land together. And so if you remove the Crown from that situation, the federal government, and then you remove Alberta from Confederation in an independent state, then immediately First Nations would then, they would control the land, they would own the land, and then on top of that, you would have to figure out some kind of legal agreement to share that territory together. And simply put, it's just absolutely preposterous to imagine that Alberta would just do this unilaterally without considering First Nations on the front end. Before even having a referendum, you should talk to First Nations first.
She also mentioned that First Nations and treaty rights would be part of the question if a referendum is posed to the people of Alberta. But what could that language possibly look like?
What it probably would look like, and this is where I think this is not really about a referendum. This is about appealing to a political base. This is about distracting from scandals that Danielle Smith is involved in. What probably that referendum question will be is very similar to Quebec, to begin the negotiations process to talk about separation. And that may be involving, let's say, for example, starting a negotiation process of inviting First Nations to a discussion table of what does separation look like. Do Alberta First Nations wish to join with Alberta to join with and create a sense of a new state together? When Quebec tried this, what happened was the James Bay Cree Inuit in the north, they held their own referendums when in 1995 Quebec wished to separate, and with a very close referendum in 1995. The James Bay Cree and the Inuit both voted unilaterally, 96% each, to stay with Canada. And so Alberta may be in for a little surprise there.
Anne Sinclair, Professor of Indigenous Studies at the University of Manitoba. Great to have your perspective on this morning. Thanks for coming back.
Yeah, Miigwech, thanks.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.